Anyone not ready?
On your first work.
We negate. Our sole contention is an infrastructure infection. As the world shifts away from conventional war and towards cyber warfare, tensions between the United States and Russia are at an all-time high. Kuzmin 19 of Reuters News finds that as the United States ramps up cyber operations against Russia, tensions are on the brink, with both nations accusing each other of threatening critical infrastructure. Our government's use of offensive cyber maneuvers has exacerbated infrastructure wars with Russia on two critical fronts. First, satellites. The state of our space infrastructure is deplorable. Tucker 19 finds that U.S. satellites operate on extremely outdated encryption schemes, making them viable targets to Russian adversaries who want to retaliate against U.S. cyber activities. Newcomb 16 furthers that satellites have been a battleground between the U.S. and Russia for over a decade, with several instances of Russia frying our systems through cyber espionage. Critically, Stella 19 finds that the more we engage in cyber warfare, the more vulnerable our satellites become because they're the easiest perceptual targets and the weakest link in the chain when all other fronts appear strong. Ultimately, Defense One concludes less than 2 months ago that a sophisticated Russian attack on our satellites could lead to massive agricultural failures in the U.S. due to the loss of critical crop surveillance and planting technologies. Crossa 19 confirms that satellite failure would cause mass famine, killing 33% of all Americans. More broadly, Gillard 18 finds that the loss of satellite control would destroy military capabilities and commercial operations, crashing the global economy and breeding mistrust between nations that forces mass proliferation and inevitable war. The second major conflict zone is electrical grids. The United States' use of OCOs has generated an increase in foreign aggression and posturing, as Slayton of Cornell University finds in 2018 that the secretive nature of offensive operations inherently raises adversary suspicion and distrust. Slayton concludes this causes aggressors to perceive marginal cyberspace operations as a threat to national security, forcing an aggressive response. Specifically, Kaplan of MIT argues in 2019 that recent cyber attacks on Russia's power grid have pushed tensions to the brink, concluding that current U.S. cyber offensive risks escalation into a full-on war. Zarevich 19 furthers that Russia has begun targeting U.S. grids to deter potential U.S. cyber operations with unprecedented levels of aggression. By using cyber attacks, we can currently normalize the attacks and put a target on our backs. Unfortunately, if Russia takes the shot at U.S. power grids, it would be catastrophic. Sanger 19 of the New York Times finds that Russia has already begun to probe the U.S. power grid in response to cyber attacks against their own grid, making substantial inroads. Provoking a cyber attack on the grid would be disastrous, as Pry of the U.S. government finds in 2015 that a cyber attack on just 9 out of 2,000 electrical transformers of our national grid system would kill 90% of Americans through starvation due to the failure of food production and storage systems. Any major attack on infrastructure, whether it's satellites or grids, would snowball. Healy of Columbia University finds in 2019 that a cyber attack that disables infrastructure would lead to cascading market failures and low investor confidence, sparking a recession far worse than 2008, which the IMF warns could send 900 million people into poverty. Overall, the cyber war with Russia will ultimately spill over to war. BB19 of Politico confirms that mutual cyber espionage between the U.S. and Russia will lead to conventional war through blurred international lines, miscalculation, and a desire to show off new weapons, finding that a war with Russia is no longer of low probability. BB concludes that a cyber-instigated war between the U.S. and Russia invariably leads to the use of nuclear weapons, and overall, Brissan 17 finds that even a small nuclear war could cover the sky with ash, dropping global temperatures and destroying crop yields as resource wars and starvation killed 2 billion people. The U.S. thought they'd reinvented the wheel with cyber weapons, but ultimately, they spun out of control. Negate.
All right, so that was
I can slow down a
bit
lot
too
on
fast,
that. Yeah.
especially in the beginning.
What was it done?
I haven't read it without stopping and timing it yet, so expect it.
There's a lot.
There's a lot of work.
Stuff that I know Dave and I would fix if we were reading it.
I'm sure you would.
It's a good
I'm
thing you're not
sure.
reading our cases.
What'd you say?
That wasn't even clever. Okay. Is anyone not ready? Time will start now. We affirm our sole contention is the least of all evils. The world is poised with a new, innovative approach to warfare. Halper 19 of the New Yorker writes that the U.S. leads the global charge in cyber warfare. Our offensive operations have come to be the primary tactic by which we exercise force on the world stage. Indeed, U.S. offensive cyber operations have effectively replaced several far more worse and aggressive tools in the arsenal of U.S. foreign policy, in particular 2 ways. First, through economic sanctions. As the United United States redefines global norms on the use of cyber operations, they become preferable to harsh coercive sanctions against our enemies. Smeets 18 of the Strategic Studies Quarterly finds that in the eyes of U.S. policymakers, cyber operations are far less inflammatory than economic sanctions because they have lower reputational costs and stronger coercive might. For example, Gompert 816 explains that when trying to crack down on Russia for their attacks on Ukraine in 2016, economic sanctions were the initial strategic choice. However, after finding that economic sanctions were too weak, a switch to offensive cyber war targeting decaded Putin's political sway and forced Russia to stop targeting critical Ukrainian infrastructure. Even now, Barnes 19 of the New York Times confirms that just 2 months ago, Trump shifted his prerogative away from oil sanctions on Iran to launching cyber offensives instead. This is critical, as Rosenberg 19 finds that Trump just rolled back Iranian oil sanctions, but if the cyber barrier didn't exist, economic sanctions against oil industries would be widespread. This has essentially saved Iran, as Lawyer 19 of Reuters found that previous sanctions on Iran's oil took their production down 80%. Empirically, Siegel finds that sanctions on Iraq in the 90s led to 1.5 million deaths from malnutrition and lack of healthcare due to delayed economic flow. Norwich 15 finalizes that economic sanctions worsen governments' respect for human rights, decreasing democracy, and limiting access to water, food, and medicine, concluding that sanctions fail to succeed 95% of the time. With Iran specifically, Rui 19 finds that increasing oil sanctions would force them to retaliate by closing the Strait of Hormuz, a key passageway for global oil trade. Carter's 12 finds that if Iran blocked the Strait of Hormuz, it would double global oil prices through the interruption of key shipping routes. Heinberg 11 finds that because high oil prices raise the cost of fuel for transporting and farming food, oil prices lead to soaring food prices. This leads Bar 11 to conclude that the last global spike in food prices pushed 44 million people into poverty. But second is military action. Given the option for a cyber attack, military strikes become less necessary. Jensen 19 of the Cato Institute finds that cyber operations offer a release valve for states, allowing them to use cyber in replacement for more aggressive military options. Indeed, Jabati 19 explains that the U.S. explicitly used cyber operations to remain in a gray zone between war and peace. More specifically, Doffman finds in June that Trump recently targeted Iran but decided not to use airstrikes. Indeed, the U.S. chose to replace airstrikes on Iran with cyber operations that comparatively save thousands of lives. Smeet 18 of Stanford University furthered in 2006 that George Bush used cyber operations to target Iran in replacement for military action that would have devastated the Middle East. Herb 12 furthers that even a single U.S. airstrike on Iran would prompt them to acquire nuclear weapons and throw the entire region into an all-out war with the U.S. RT 12 furthers that if the defense strategy of Iran to respond to U.S. attacks with military engagement, dragging regional actors into a war and forcing states to pick a side. They further that Iran would take the opportunity to attempt to wipe Israel off the world's geographic history. Overall, Bresson 17 finds that even a small nuclear war would cover the sky with ash, dropping global temperatures and destroying crop yields as resource wars and starvation kill 2 billion people. Even if escalation never goes that far, Dangsky 19 finds that local damage to Iranian oil fields would triple global oil prices, 15 times the necessary price increase to crash the global economy. Kleindon 13 concludes that another recession would push 900 million people into poverty. Don't push millions into poverty, and join me on the affirmation.
Cool.
Would you like the first question as the first speaking team?
I would. All right.
Perfect.
Times can start now. All right, so you said that one missile strike in Iran is going to cause them to get nuclear missiles. Can you explain to me, not with a card, but with logic, why this is true?
We didn't say that.
You didn't. Okay, then can you very briefly tell me what you did say?
So we said the United States chose to retaliate to Iran by using offensive cyber operations as opposed to launching a missile at them.
Right, and then you said that in 2006, Bush did some stuff in Iran with cyber operations instead, and then you said if we had done a missile strike instead, that would have prompted them to get nuclear weapons and then try and wipe Israel off the map. Can you please explain with logic why one missile strike is going to suddenly cause them to do this?
So by seeing that the U.S. is starting to missile strike them, they're going to feel like they are in need to attack them in response, and nuclear weapons is one of the primary ways that they do that. But you just asked 2 questions, I'm going to take one.
For sure.
So let's talk about your argument on satellites. You explained that satellites have been a battleground for the U.S. and Russia for a while. Mm-hmm. So if they've fought our satellites, why hasn't your impacts happened?
Because cyber technology is relatively new and it's only now increasing, and because we've been increasing offensive cyber operations, and with the more use of that, then it becomes apparent that satellites are weaker.
Wait, so what new developments have we seen that enables Russia to take out all of our satellites? What technology in specific?
Well, it kind of happens in two ways. One is just like generally drawing attention to it and like showing like a perceptual way of seeing that satellites are generally weaker.
You're not being lay enough right now. You're saying you're saying stuff. Like,
Oh, it's supposed. Okay,
got
got it.
Right?
Got it. Yeah.
Keep going.
But the second way in which this happens is as time goes on, our satellite technology grows more and more outdated. Therefore, as Russia is focusing on developing their satellite technology and the US is not, Russia is now able to overtake us when it comes to satellite
so you didn't
technology.
answer my question. So what satellite technology has been developed?
It doesn't have to be any like brand new specific satellite technology, and I don't really have the exact name of satellite technology.
Me the satellite technology of the past has failed, but there's been this new development that enables Russia to take out all of our satellites. So I'm just asking, what technology is that?
It's not one specific technology. It's the fact that the U.S. hasn't been focusing on improving its satellite technology, and Russia is. But we spent a lot of time on this. Can I take a question?
Yeah.
Okay. So you talked about sanctions, and you were saying that basically Russia stopped targeting the U.S. after we lifted sanctions. What about the fact that Russia started a whole cyber espionage campaign to try and take down U.S. power grids?
So they haven't been successful at taking out our power grids. Actually, if you say Russia's already trying to target our power grids, wouldn't that non-unique your second argument?
No.
So what changes?
The fact that Russia is just now starting to do this, they're just now beginning this cyber espionage campaign. But the question here that you're still not answering is that you're saying that once we lifted sanctions, Russia basically backed off the U.S. But why is it that they're now starting this new cyber espionage campaign? Could it possibly be because the U.S. is using offensive cyber operations?
So we're saying putting sanctions on Russia is comparatively worse than us just using offensive cyber operations because it doesn't cause the peril to their economy, as we've seen with
still not answering my question, but time is up.
That's correct.
Do you have a card I caught?
What? No prep time?
Where's the...
No.
It's rebuttal.
Wait, really quick, how
I
do
thought I
you...
was doing second rebuttal.
Can you show me where the
I
block
know,
file is
no
on
prep time
this?
for his rebuttal.
Oh, here.
As usual.
Got it, never mind.
Impressive.
Apparently not. I've not
Should-
heard names.
Yeah, you're not going to be able
Gabe
to
doesn't
find...
have them.
I want the thing I... Oh, I don't have it. Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry, not everybody is like you.
So it's just going to be going directly down their case. Anybody not ready? Does this have to be live?
It's your call.
Okay.
I mean, I'm in the debate however
Like,
I want.
don't say and if you don't need to.
Okay.
Understandable.
Like, I will understand what you're saying if you make sense.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Overview on top, both teams have conceded that cyber operations are increasing in the status quo. At that point, you want to be weighing future ramifications of the increase of cyber operations. At that point, go to their sanctions link. You're going to be turning sanctions against them for 4 reasons. Sanctions are actually good. First, coercive diplomacy. A comprehensive analysis by the IMF finds sanctions could lead to a cumulative economic loss of up to 9% of a nation's GDP as lower capital accumulation and technological transfers weaken an already declining economy, meaning that nations are forced to listen on the point at which we sanction. As a result, Richard Nephew of the National Interest explains, sanctions could lead to compromise more. There's a better chance for a diplomatic resolution of crisis with sanctions than without them. Empirically, Davis of Notre Dame finds the use of financial sanctions increases the probability of compliance in negotiations almost twofold. And Oleg Blukemyshev of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace affirms the ceasefires and agreements negotiated in places like Minsk over the Ukrainian crisis were largely the result of sanctions. It's the only form of coercive diplomacy in a time where cyber norms are not effective enough to garner change, as we've never seen it. Second, military setbacks. Mikazami of the Week explains, in 2016, Russia's defense budget increased by 25%. However, unable to end economic problems, the defense budget is slated to go up less than 1% in 2016 as an unprecedented reduction as a direct result of sanctions. Sanctions cripple militaries, and also we make the argument, actually, we'll read that at the bottom. Then Cooper of the Moscow Times furthers Western sanctions restrict access to technologies that can be used for military purposes. That's the warrant. And then Chris Demchak of the University of Arizona impacts, under a more developed military, there's a greater potential for crisis to escalate through these destabilizing military actions, meaning on the point at which we concede the link that they are decreasing sanctions, that decreases the propensity by which nations get their militaries crippled and actually cause an increase in proliferation. They never give you any impact that they actually stopped Iran's military from growing, only that it was better from sanctions, but sanctions increase their military capability, which triggers all of their miscalculation links. Then, third, turn it because it leads to unsustainable war. Money for The International Business Times explains in May, money for Russia's military budget is coming out of the Kremlin's reserve fund, which is technically designed to soften the blow of economic setback. Western sanctions prevent Russia from borrowing on global markets, so Moscow had to tap into this fund. Iran's virtually no different. They also have to tap into global funds to make these claims. Russia can maintain the current deficit for less than 1 or 2 years before it has to withdraw from Ukraine. Don't just, Alex going to come up here and say that all the empirics are about Russia, but make them prove a very strong link to why Iran is different, because we argue that they act the exact same way, especially when they themselves gave you Russian empirics to prove part of their example, the entire Ukraine 2016 evidence. The fourth turn is that it sends a really strong signal when you sanction a nation. Robert Kahn of Foreign Affairs explains any effects of sanctions must be weighed against the cost of doing nothing and the risk of protracted instability, because we acknowledge that cyber weapons virtually do nothing. All they say is that they take the place of military action, but they don't give you a single benefit of the cyber operations. We argue that they're a really bad placeholder because sanctions are better. At a time when these nations are providing an unprecedented challenge to the existing rules of the international order, it becomes critical to sanction them. Then at the bottom, D-Link at Kennedy 19... D-Link does first link first. Like, the evidence that sanctions fail is probably pretty bad. Judges should call for the card because the sanctions that fail 95% of the time, that's one of the most famously indicted card. We've been indicting that card since freshman year. It's bullshit. Then on the bottom, D-Link it again. Iran will never block the Strait of Hormuz. They would not shoot themselves in the foot because they know it would trigger global war. Iran this stands not to benefit from their nation being destroyed. Then on military actions, first D-Link it's just midterms. Kennedy 19 writes that neither Iran nor the United States actually wants a war that turns violent, concluding that both sides are likely to engage in a more covert battle of wills, with cyber being the primary force. It was election season for Trump and a midterm season for Bush. All of their empirics come from the times where leaders needed to posture by showing nations that they were going to get stuff done. This is exactly what happened during 9/11 when Bush tried to garner support for war because they know that it increases political capital to say that you're going to go to war. That means that they won't actually go to war because they will always rely on this. I mean, no, they won't actually. They were never going to actually launch this cyber. They were never going to actually launch this missile. Sorry, they were never actually going to launch the missile. Then turn it against them because Schneider maintains that since cyber attacks are hard to detect, attribute to a source, and turn into a threat, they're also hard to send clear signals. Thus, they send no clear signal to Iran. Thus, they're less escalatory than other practices. That also means they are less effective too. Even if you buy that they're less escalatory, turn it against them because they're significantly less effective. So, at the bottom, U.S. was never going to launch this strike, and then. On the mad stuff, mad checks back. Nations would never go nuclear, not even if they're going to target their silos. They can't target every silo before another attack is launched. Mad would always stop nuclear war.
I'm going to frontline my whole case and then go to his case.
Why not go? I'm going to frontline my entire case. DeTolido, you're just going to do your whole case.
I'm going to start on my second link, or I'm going to start on his overview. Everyone ready?
Wait, okay. Overview the
Wait,
second link or overview
yeah.
the first link?
Can we get the order again?
Overview, second link, first link.
And then my case?
Yes.
Yeah, everyone ready?
Overview second first, sure.
Yeah. Start on the overview. He doesn't give a warrant. We say you can look at both because both of them have the same impact, and that's what the resolution calls for. Go to the second link, buy all of his link or all of his impact events as to why countries won't go to war and why mutually assured destruction checks back. That checks back against every single one of his turns on sanctions because it means that there's no need for sanctions in the first place because now the country ever has an incentive to go to war. And then you can extend literally all of his other arguments. And he says that there's no clear signal, so it's less effective. But one, he doesn't contest uniqueness, that literally the risk of conflict is going down right now, and he doesn't show that actual war is going to occur. And if anything, we'll deal with the cyber offense on his case. Then you can go to sanctions. Like, you can literally concede all his analysis. At that point, it doesn't matter because there's no need for it because he himself reads impact defense as to why countries would never want to go to war. It's all things like midterms and mutually assured destruction just back, which means literally the only impact that exists in today's round is that sanctions cripple local economies. And the last time it happened to kill 1.5 million people, which outweighs your entire case one on probability because the argument goes cold conceded. We tell you probability is the most important metric because one, that's what policymakers use, but second, if not, we focus on high magnitude impacts like theirs, but MESCO finds that high magnitude impacts make it so that we're always focusing on things like the precautionary principle, which is focusing on like high magnitude things, but since everything has a risk of snowballing through low probability or high probability into a high magnitude impact, we're forced to sit around and do everything but also do nothing at the same time. So you can literally, it's literally TKO. You can vote for us now. Go over to their case. Off the top, a giant response at the top. Jensen 19 finds that offensive operations are actually the most effective way for deterring nations and actually preventing things like all of the arguments that they talk about because one, it allows us to locate the issues, locate cyber attacks and actually prevent them from happening in the future. But second, acts as a deterrent because countries know that if they cyber attack the United States, we would cyber attack them back. That's why all of their arguments and all their evidence talking about satellites and grids tells you that Russia is using it to deter the United States, and everyone actually says that Russia has an incentive to shut down grids or satellites. Then you can turn it and then you can de-link it again because Gen 17 finds that in statistical analysis, like every single OCO in U.S. history finds that the absolute vast majority never results in retaliation. When it does, like 70% of them are in low retaliation. That's why we've literally been doing OCOs for nearly a decade now, but there's never been a grid shutdown. There's never been a satellite shutdown. Then combine both of the links. One, Gen 17 finds that there's never been a big impact on things like cyber attacks because the United States does it reverse engineers any of the cyber attack and the malware that occurs, and then they use it to fix vulnerabilities. That's why they concluded even if our grid got shut down for a week, it would literally lead to zero impact. But second, Valero 15 finds that it would never lead to conflict because states actually prefer diplomatic resolutions alongside with cyber operations. That's because Cornell 17 finds that countries actually use cyber operations as a form of de-escalation because they use it as an alternative to things like military weapons. Even if the United States would never actually launch a military weapon, it's the perception that they use cyber instead of military, which leads to de-escalation, which is why literally all of their arguments are empirically disproved. 2006 proves it. That goes clean extended on our case. But then go to the first thing about satellites. First, we argue the Russia's incentive is not unique. They said that Russia targets satellites because satellites are the weakest place, but satellites would be the weakest place in the U.S. arsenal, regardless as to whether or not we develop cyber operations. Second, they don't actually have any evidence that Russia would actually shut down any of these things. We said that Russia would never try and shut down U.S. satellites because they know it would respond with U.S. OCO shutting down their satellites, and then you can turn it because that means U.S. OCOs are the only active deterrents. But third, we argue that U.S. cyber operations are only going to be happening, yeah. Then they don't really have an impact defense. We said they could just switch focus to like other satellite arms. Then go to the second link talking about grids. One, their evidence says Russia's using it for deterrence. It literally explicitly says Russia will not try and shut down grids because it knows it will result in a U.S. response. But second, we'd argue that they don't exactly have an impact because Freeburg 14 explains that countries can simply that we can just shift focus to literally any of the other almost 2,000 parts of our electrical grid. But then go to their impact. Their first link is about recessions. First, we'd argue that independent hackers are going to be all causes for the recession because they're going to be targeting things like the financial industry. But second, they're going to give a reason as to why China would or Russia would target the financial industry. Either. But third, we'd argue that even if these individuals cause recession, we outweigh on long term, but because one, we argue that cyber operations prevent, or if you buy our turn at the top, it means that we prevent things like critical infrastructure damage in the long term by deterring hackers. Then, on their impact about Russian war, one, we argue there's no miscalculation because hotlines always check back because countries don't want to go to war. Then, they say that they want to flex their military muscle, but they can do that without going to war. Their own mutually assured destruction arguments checks back against literally every single one of these. But fourth, third, list 12 finds that the only reason cyber operations would ever lead to war is because countries perceive cyber as resulting in a high impact damage, but because countries like Russia and China perceive cyber as a small form of escalation, they would never respond to cyber with nuclear arms. They literally do not read a warrant as to why cyber war turns nuclear. So at that point, Krebs does the analysis that says a nuclear war is a lot worse than any of their cyber wars, which means even if we ran a little bit of the offense on our second link on military, which Jackson could frontline because they only read defense, we win the round.
Wait, real quick. You said nuclear war is worse than cyber war?
Yes.
Did you mean military war?
Huh?
The last thing you said.
I said nuclear war.
Then you meant nuclear war.
Yes, I meant
Well,
nuclear
we're
war.
going to be going for. Actually, we're going to be going for grids. So just try to do that while I'm doing this. Okay.
Please.
Yeah. Oh, can you write this down? You're going to want to read this.
Read what?
Okay.
That block. Okay, ready?
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. It's a good round.
All right.
Also good time.
Can I get the first question, bro?
Yeah.
Okay. Time starts now. Let's talk about how you try to take out all the sanction turns with extending the D-link on military actions. So considering not every turn impacted out to a lack of military to a surplus of or to an increase in military action, how does all 4 turns die on the point
what they
at which we
impact
consider
to?
D-link?
The second one was you crippled their military. The third one was Russia can't borrow, so they don't have money for military. The fourth one was it sends a signal. There's no impact there. And the first one was coercive diplomacy.
Coercive diplomacy doesn't have an impact of all. It doesn't always have to impact up to war. We can coercively.
What does it impact to? Are you going to read a new impact in summary?
No, we read you in the rebuttal that coercive diplomacy is helpful for also like financial decisions. It's helpful for bending another country to our will. And that doesn't always mean
how
preventing
does it do
war.
that?
That doesn't always mean preventing
No,
war.
how does it do that?
By crippling their economy.
Exactly, right? So at that point, considering you don't read an impact of what bending them to
Listen,
our will
Alec,
is
crippling
the
Russia's
only
economy
impact.
doesn't have an impact on them going to war in the context of this turn.
No,
What
I
we
agree.
argue is that sanctions are good because they crash Russia's economy and don't just prevent war, but also prevent things like oil prolif, also prevent harmful trade practices.
Whoa. Harmful trade practices and oil prolif were one, never an analysis made because I would have read rebuttal to them. If Sienna wants to do it in summary, that's abusive. But second, we'd argue the weighing is pretty simple. Even if things like oil prolif are bad, those are short-term metrics. We'd argue things like sanctions do what they did in Iraq where they destroyed economic development and killed 2 million people.
Why would I ram block
But
the
I'm
strait?
gonna-
Why would I ram block the strait?
We don't say they're going to block the strait.
Yes,
I
you
kid
do. That's the impact on sanctions.
Yeah, no, the impact is on sanctions is the Siegel evidence, which is that it destroys economic value, decreases people's access to things like healthcare.
So
Empirically,
Siegel
the last
99,
time,
right?
no, let me
Siegel
explain this.
99 is the card that you're extending.
Yeah, he
Is
talks
there
about the
sole
last
impact?
time the U.S. had sanctions, like what we would have, because you conceded the link, was on Iraq in the 90s, where it killed 2 million
Alec,
people
this
and
evidence is from
classified
the
as a
90s,
genocide.
right? Over 20 years ago?
Why is it from the 90s?
Why?
Because it's about...
You're the one reading the card, man.
You want me to tell you? Because the last time
No,
we
I
had
want to ask you
sanctions-
another question because it's getting repetitive.
I mean, do you want me to answer your first question? Because
Dude.
it seems like you just poorly answered it yourself.
Those will answer it in summary. All right, let's go to
Is
the...
it because
let's
you
go
never
to
even asked the question
let's
of
go-
rebuttal?
I-
Because I need to answer it right now.
Let's go to the grids impact. You say that Russia is just going to do our grids to deter, and because they care about the U.S. response, right?
Yeah.
Given that the U.S. has already responded, and we read you evidence from I think it's Selin, which finds that grids have been a low impact battlefield for over a decade. How do you know that Russia cares about How do you know that Russia cares about a U.S. response when the
Well, you
U.S. has
just-
been responding for over 2 years?
Well, you just double-binded yourself. You said the U.S. has been responding in a it's been a low-impact fashion, right?
Yeah,
That's
and
the
then
reason Russia would never
refer
shut
to
down
the
a grid.
overview that cyber is increasing. We need to weigh the future
I am aware
ramifications
of what your
elevated
overview
tensions.
means.
That's how you
The
access all your
number-
impacts.
No, because the number of cyber attacks that are
Let's
going
clear
up.
up. Let's clear up the overview. We both
No.
can see
I'm
that
aware of
cyber's
what
up
your
in the
overview
square,
is.
right?
No. You're misinterpreting
You say
what
look
the
at
overview
both.
means.
You say look at both, right?
Jackson, do you want me to answer your question? Because
Yeah,
you've asked
I'm-
4, so I'm going to combine all of them and answer them like
They're
this.
all completely
your
different
evidence.
questions.
Your
All
evidence says
literally
the
not able
number,
to answer all 4 of them at the same time.
Your evidence says the number of cyber attacks is going up. It doesn't say the propensity is.
That's
which means
cross. That's
you're in a
cross.
double bind.
That's
It's
cross.
either going to happen or it
That's
doesn't.
cross.
Alan, you never answered why the Carters from the 90s in that combination of answers.
Yeah, what's the
Can we do some
problem?
prep?
Yes, of course. We're going to be taking some prep. All right, don't worry. This is a really easy path. No, we're going to start prep time.
I just
Can you guys just, we're going to start prep time. Okay.
can't do that.
Yeah, I did.
What?
If anything,
Okay, so
All right,
Also,
so
the
start
second
prep.
Literally what they're
Can you
saying
guys,
is
can we get
wrong.
some quiet?
Also, it is TK.
Well, this is important. Okay.
you have.
So on sanctions, you're just gonna be extending the turn about coercive. Let's go to their. Let's start on their case first, right? So I read 4 turns. First, coercive diplomacy. What? Let's look at. He tells you that nations just literally won't go to war.
What did he respond to? I didn't get his response.
Sorry.
I didn't get a response to that.
So he just says nations don't want to go to war, so none of these happen. What you need to say is, it isn't about war. Major evidence is that they comply in financial negotiations. That's critical in maintaining safe trade practices, etc., okay? The card, everyone can help the card. Coercive diplomacy is good because it literally increases negotiation capacity twofold. That's the evidence we read you. The D-Link is completely non-interactive. We still have 100% access to that turn.
Yeah, I know. You don't need to do
Cool. Okay, cool. Then, wait, so then, they concede around blocks is good. They concede that the sanctions evidence is not good.
The what? We can see this one.
I say that the sanctions failing evidence is really bad, and they concede that. Good. And then,
Is that all we're doing?
wait, on military actions, I say that it's just about you say they have no incentive to go to the war. Sorry, are you okay with one really brief flex prep question on the flow?
Sure.
Did you kick out of your second link? Did you kick out of the second link by extending the D-Link that they don't want to go to war, so it's fine? You did, correct? I have that right?
I extended that they don't want to go to war.
Okay, cool. So we don't need to go for the second link.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
have
they
no
don't wanna go
strength-
to
We have no
war.
offense there.
He's saying that.
They don't want to go to war, but their impact on strikes is war, so they don't have an impact if they do go for it. It's fine.
Okay.
Then on our case, right? Let's beat this turn on satellites, then go for grids, okay? So they say that turn reverse engineering helps vulnerabilities. They completely misconstrue reverse engineering. Reverse engineering is a neg argument because it means that terrorists literally use the technology we give them against them. Stuxnet from 2010 was turned into the black hole exploit kit, which was responsible for 29% of cyber attacks globally. Reverse engineering, they have it completely backwards. It really hurts them when they concede that argument. They should probably.
Jackson, stop. First of all, you're like
Sorry,
giving
I'm
this
sorry.
which is a waste of time.
You're right. Okay.
This is like not helpful. Okay.
So reverse engineering flows neg because it's used by Iran to make attacks. Does that make sense?
Give me the number of how many people it killed.
No, it's used for 29% of cyber attacks globally. Does that make sense? Iran.
No, okay. My question is
Iran.
like, there's a question if that's turned into black holes, which like used for 29% of terror cyber attacks.
Hmm?
That's not what
Yes.
reverse engineering is.
Yes. Then extend the impact. We're not going to extend any impact except that.
But, like,
Then on grids, they say that it's alt causal and they care more about U.S. response. You can group those together because it's all due to elections. They don't outweigh long term. You want to
I
extend the
have
grids.
no idea.
evidence. You'll do it. You're going to extend our impact on grids, okay? You can do
Wait,
this.
I don't even know what he said. I'm not good response. Say that.
They said that they care about the U.S. response. Don't. If that's true, we wouldn't be in a war with U.S. right now. Or with Russia. Russia wouldn't be in a war.
Okay, wait. This.
It's okay. This is a pretty easy summary to give. If you have time for it, you can wait.
Okay.
Send Gabe this recording.
It's gonna be uploaded.
Wait, let's
It's
just.
gonna be, let's worry about that later, actually. Okay. I'm just gonna go their case, our case, and everything in order, but like too big. Wait.
What link?
Then can I
You
have
don't
this
need to
switch?
read
Do
it.
you want to switch? Oh, I was gonna read it. Wait, I put it here. Just stop.
What link are you gonna start on in that case?
I'm gonna start on the sanctions thing on one of the turns. The
Okay.
first turn Jackson.
And then
First turn?
actually,
Okay.
yeah, all right.
How long is this speech? 3 minutes?
I don't know where you're gonna read this. I don't think you will actually.
I was-
Shame.
Oh, actually, you're right. I'm not
Also,
reading
just so you know, like prefacing, even though you guys were laying cross, like this shouldn't be lay. Like you should be like appealing to lay, but like, yeah.
Yeah, well, I know that Sienna fully understands the direction of the last 4 speeches that have just
Yeah,
had.
okay.
been had.
Oh,
Okay.
I'll make sure.
So
You
yeah.
need a timer? You got it.
Yeah, I got it.
Cool.
Everyone good?
Uh,
All right. Go to their case, go to their link about sanctions. They try and tell you that coercive diplomacy is a bad thing, but Jackson turns this and explains to you that it increases compliance. The only response that they give us is that nations don't want to go to war. This is completely non-interactive with what Jackson was saying. What we're trying to say here is that coercive diplomacy is actually good because it increases negotiation twofold. Our evidence is literally saying that coercive diplomacy is increasing it twofold, and the fact that they didn't respond to that because they tried to say that nations don't want to go to war, again, that D-link is completely non-interactive with the turn that we're trying to put on the flow. So they're like, extend the turn there that we're saying
Impact
that,
to better negotiation.
yeah, extend the turn there that coercive diplomacy is good, which impacts to better negotiation, which in the long run is actually going to decrease our chance of war. So if we're actually trying to save lives here, we should probably be taking steps to decrease chances of war. Then go to where they tell you that sanctions fail. They didn't respond to Jackson's dealing, saying that sanctions don't fail and that this evidence is really, really bad. So, just extend the fact that like sanctions don't fail. This evidence is bad. All right. On our case, go down to this satellites link. They try to put a turn on this saying that terrorists are going to reverse engineer this and that it's actually this technology is helping them. They've really misunderstood what reverse engineering is. Reverse engineering is actually a negation argument. Take Stuxnet, for example. Stuxnet was turned into the black hole export kit, which is now used in 29% of terrorist attacks that are done through the cyberspace. The fact is that they're completely misconstruing what reverse engineering is here. What we're saying is that these terrorists are getting they're getting the cyber technology and reverse engineering it, and then they're able to use it. So this is a negation argument. So go ahead and extend that, saying that, yeah, reverse engineering is not that. Then go down to the grids link. When we told you about grid war and provoking, they try and say that like there's an alternate cause and that they care, like countries don't care about the U.S. response. I didn't get what you were trying to say here. Can you just like...
They care about the U.S. response because the U.S. is retaliating against them now and they're still attacking.
Clearly they care about the U.S. response because the U.S. is retaliating now and they're still
They're responding to the U.S.
They're still
actively.
responding to the U.S. actively.
You want to extend this grids offense. It's pretty
So
good.
yeah,
You have time.
extend the grids offense.
Okay, Slayton finds that they literally increase distrust and they don't respond to that.
Slayton finds that they literally increase distrust and they don't respond to that. Extend the grids impact. What we're saying is like this is provoking a grids war, which is really, really bad because it's going to lead to 90% of all Americans losing their lives, which is, I'm pretty sure, the largest impact in this round.
They say that it's alt causal, but that's only through election season after we still need to make sure that this deterrence exists.
They try and claim that it's alt cause, but that's only through election season. After that, we have to still make sure that this deterrence persists, and the only way to do that is to decrease our use of offensive cyber operations, because otherwise we're going to have more interactions with the U.S. power grid, which again is extremely risky, especially because of the propensity for reverse
90%
engineering.
dead.
What?
90% will die.
Again, 90%
If just
of
0.45% of grids are attacked.
Again, 90% of Americans will die if literally just 0.45% of grids are attacked.
They
And what
concede
we're
it's going
explaining
up
to you,
in the squirrel.
they literally are handing us the argument that reverse engineering is possible. The more we use offensive cyber operations, the more reverse engineering can happen, and then targeting the power grid, and then 90% of Americans will die. Negate.
Awesome. You put
Yeah, just give me time.
yeah, let me know if you need anything. I'll just be like playing games on the phone.
Okay.
Do we need this? Or no?
We're not going to need any psychology anymore.
And all the defense.
Okay. So,
I know, he's going pretty fast. So,
okay. I need a timer.
Do you want ours?
Okay.
That'd be awesome. Okay. So the order is just going to be starting on our case, extending some weighing Alec did in his speech, and then going on to their case. We're going to be starting on our first link. Okay. Is anyone not ready? Remember the weighing Alec gives to you in his rebuttal when she says that we should be preferring probability in today's debate because any argument has a small percent chance to spill over into a massive magnitude impact. That's why we should be looking at nuke war scenarios because anything can lead to nuke war and extinction. Instead, prefer probability. With that, go to our first argument on economic sanctions. We explained to you that offensive cyber operations are really good because the alternative is putting sanctions onto countries. We tell you that empirically, when looking at what happened with Iraq when the United States put sanctions on them, that caused 1.5 million people to die, and that actually caused their entire state to decrease in development and cause them to not put as much prioritization on things like human rights and democracy. Let's go to the responses they extend. First, they extend the first turn Palak reads to you, in which he says that it forces countries to listen, and it increases the amount of negotiation we see. They don't read you any actual impact of that increased negotiations, but also the fact that they are being coerced into being forced to listen by destroying their entire economy is probably a bad thing, because while they may negotiate, those 1.5 million people are still very much dead. Then they try and extend it in an indict in which they say that like our 95% failure rate of sanctions is like really bad and that they've been responding to it since freshman year, but they never actually gave you an indict or anything that was wrong with the evidence. They kind of just assumed there was something wrong, never gave you the warrant as to why it's wrong. At that point, we're getting clear access into 1.5 million people not dying when we put sanctions on people and stopping the development of countries as a whole. With that, go to our second argument on military sanctions. We're not going for the war impact. We'll agree, neither side wants to go to war, but they completely concede the analysis that offensive cyber operations stop the US from putting a military strike on Iran. What that military strike would have done is it would have been completely destroyed local oil fields within Iran, which would have had many negative impacts on and spike oil prices, causing 44 million people to go into food starvation. With that, go on to their case. There's a few things you need to extend. Extend the overview Alec reads to you on top, in which we say that OCOs are actually really good at deterring war. Two justifications. First, because it allows the US to better locate past cyber attacks that have happened, and second, it acts as a deterrent and tell Russia, tell other countries to not hack us because we're going to hack them back. The biggest response they drop is the next response Alec reads underneath that, in which he says that OCOs never result in retaliation. That means once they can see this analysis, Russia is never going to retaliate by hurting our grids because empirically we've never seen people retaliate to our OCOs. Let's go to the reverse engineering argument. They really mishandle it. What the argument is that if Russia were to theoretically hack into our satellites or hack into our power grids, we would be able to know the technology that they were using, reverse engineer it, and make us immune to it happening in the next time. It's not about this whole Stuxnet argument that they make it out to be. Then, there's also no impact that they quantify from that reverse engineering. Go to their second warrant on electrical grids. Few things you have to respond. First response Alec makes is that Russia knows that if they were to try and take out our entire grid, it would result in the US responding very, very militaristically in a very bad way. Russia does not want to see their entire economy get destroyed by like sanctions or any other militaristic response that they may give. Additionally, go to their impact on recessions. We tell you that independent hackers are going to do the hackings that they say Russia may do in either world. At that point, their impact is probably non-unique and you shouldn't give it any probability there. They drop way too much defense in order to grant them high probability and make their impact actually mean something under the weighing.
You guys can have the first question across.
Okay, so you try and go for reverse engineering. How can you say reverse engineering can be an AF point when if you literally just look at the logic of it, the more that we're using offensive cyber operations, the more people can reverse engineer.
First, because even if we buy your analysis on terrorism, it doesn't matter because A, it's not impacted out, but B, it still concedes our analysis that even if terrorists can reverse engineer US OCOs, the US reverse engineers Russia's OCOs, which fixes all their vulnerabilities, right? That's why your evidence that shutting down 9 out of 2,000 electrical grids isn't even about a cyber attack, because the evidence that is about a cyber attack, which is drop defense, says that they can shut down our grid for a week and it wouldn't lead to anything.
Okay, first, the impact is that, this has been used in 29% of terrorist attacks, so I would say it's pretty clear that the impact is going to be terrorist attacks because it's increasing their capacity for terrorist attacks.
What happens in terrorist attacks?
People die?
Oh, I would have loved to hear that in a speech.
Also, you're talking about offensive cyber operations from terrorist attacks. People don't die in offensive cyber operations.
Also, if anything, we just cross-apply our, case analysis, which is, the dropped underview.
Okay, do you have a question?
Explain to me
which is that attack is inevitable.
Well, it sounds like you guys are going to go for reverse engineering, so what's the impact of it?
Death. I mean...
Death from cyber operations. So reverse engineering the technology they have from our OCOs.
Can you give me the link chain?
How does it result in death if it's just cyber attacks?
Because when terrorists are conducting their attacks via cyber operations...
Can you give me one empiric of that happening?
No.
Wait, what?
One empiric...
What's the question?
One empiric of terrorist cyber operations that they've got from reverse engineering our cyber operations actually killing someone.
We make the argument that as long as you increase the propensity for cyber operations, you invariably increase the propensity for lives lost. Anytime, anytime you conduct more war, more people die. That's that's a very
you guys
reasonable
dropped
extrapolation.
a plethora of pieces of defense that said cyber operations lead to literally nothing.
Okay, we've been on this for almost 2 minutes.
I mean, it's your offense. Your only offense. So, yeah,
Okay,
we
we've
should
still
probably
been on
spend a
this
lot
for 2
of time.
minutes. Do you
Okay, you
wanna-
can have a question.
What's the probability of your impact?
Of what impact?
I agree.
Like, which one? Oh my god.
How is probability real?
Sorry.
Hey,
Sorry.
yo, how is probability real?
It's real Wang when you can see the Wang Alec gives in his rebuttal and I make in my summary that.
How do you measure whether something's probable or not?
If there's
if
not
they don't
like 6
contest it,
pieces of
that's
drop
100.
defense.
Oh,
in
so
there?
it's strength. So it's not probability in the lay sense. It's just strength of link weighing.
So you don't contest
Sure,
our
yeah.
link that gives us good
Okay.
probability, which fits under
All
our
right.
Wang. Yeah. Do you have a question?
Yeah, we would say. I mean, what Wang are you gonna do?
No, we're just conceding that probability isn't like, Judge, it's happened empirically before, it has a high probability. It's strength of link weighing. We're all conceding that, right? It's if you don't have a response on it, it has 100% probability in the round. Perfect. Okay.
Awesome. What's your response to our offense?
What's your response
I'm
to
not-
our link level?
Well, that's kind of the purpose of what this final focus is about to be.
Oh, really? I thought you weren't supposed to bring brand new responses on drop pieces of defense.
Who says that my response is going to be brand new?
The flow, because there's not a response on it right now.
Like you just like the things Sienna extends is the turn in that
Which she impacts out
sanctions
to
don't
war, by
work.
the way.
Like where is that contesting our link?
What'd you say?
The only thing.
What's your
Sienna
offense on
extends-
sanctions right now?
Kills like 2 million people,
1.5
because it
million
destroys
people
local
die.
economy.
1.5 million people
Also
die.
prevents long-term
And what's the
sustainable
impact on
development,
oil
shifts away
field
from
damage?
democracy.
44 million people food starvation.
44 million.
I actually may have miscited that.
No, it is. Yeah. You're totally right about it.
That's cross, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Oh, this is a very fun round.
The best part of it is when Daniel turns to me to whisper something unintelligible.
Wait, I do that to game in round.
When Daniel
All right,
knocks throughout
guys.
their entire
All right.
speeches.
Overview,
What'd you say?
grids, weighing.
Okay.
Okay.
Overview, they concede strength of link weighing comes first. At that point, go to grids. They concede Slayton on strength of link. This is 100% probability in the round. They find this distrust and posturing through offensive cyber operations literally increase Russian distrust. They try to say that it's used for de-escalatory purposes, but they refute. They don't respond to the link that. Right now, the US and Russia are making significant inroads into each other's grids on strength of link that doesn't have a response. That's Pri 15 of the US government, who continues to go extended, which says that literally Russia and the US are at small-scale cyber war right now, and they can see that it's only going up in the scroll. At that point, Slayton gets 100% probability in the round because he literally finds that it increases distrust and posturing. Don't let them just use the scores; they're only evidence when they concede. You have to look at both. Then on the link, they try to say that it's alt causal. They drop Shannon's frontline. This only happens through election season. They try to say that hackers have political motivations and Russia will only try to hack us in the elections like the DNC stuff. But after the election, you still need that guarantee that your grids are going to be strong. But they can see that cyber operations takes out that chance of grids being strong past the election season. You're going to want to be winning. You wait on grids here because Lowe's completely fucks up when he drops the front line. That this has 100% probability after election season, which is still a huge impact. At that point, extend the impact that we read you, which is that in this hack on just 9 out of 2,000 grids would cause the death of 90% of Americans. Alec tries to say that it's only about non-financial grids and that the right grids aren't targeted, but Lowe's doesn't extend that. That would be new in the two. It would be a shadow of attention if you brought it up. Do not let him bring up that defense, which means you concede that 90% of people die. At that point, wait, we concede 100% of their case. 44 million plus 1.5 million is 45.5 million. We outweigh significantly on magnitude because 90% of Americans is way more than 45.5 million. We have 100% probability under their own weighing on strength of link. You're going to be voting on grids because after the election season, the grid has no chance of security. Even if hacks go on throughout the grid, even if hacks go on throughout the election, any backline that's given to this now is going to be a new response. You're not going to want to consider it. Lowe's completely messes up on the grids argument when he goes for sanctions. We concede all the defense on sanctions. That beats all their turns. We concede that they have 45.5 million lives. We accept the deaths of 90% of Americans. It's a super easy vote for the neg here.
They drop the defense like OCO's never solved them much.
It's fine. Everyone ready? Their case, my case. It sucks the defense is sticky. Go to their case. They dropped that the United States would just take any malware or any test cyber attack that Russia uses. They would reverse engineer and use it to plug all vulnerabilities, which is the reason that they also dropped the the Friedberg evidence, which was in rebuttal that even if the national grid shut down for a week, it would literally lead to absolutely nothing happening. That's why their evidence that 9 out of 2,000 grids getting shut down kills 90% of Americans isn't even about a cyber attack. Our evidence is way more explicit and it's way more applicable. You can literally cover and drop them out. But second, they drop all of the terms that Jackson sent in summary, which is first, that if anything, mutually assured the destruction always strikes back, because even if they're making inroads right now and distrust is increasing, there's defense on their internal link, that they would never actually use these inroads to shut down grids, because if Russia knows that if they shut down the US grid, the US already has inroads in their grid, and the US would shut down their grid. This was in rebuttal, was in summary, it's dropped in final focus, and they also dropped the analysis that the US uses OCOs to target cyber capabilities in other countries and shut it down and limit their ability to use inroads to turn into cyber attacks that actually impacts against us, which means if anything, it's not a turn, it's terminal defense, and you can also drop them now, which means if anything, you can literally vote for us, because you can see that there's literally 100% probability of like 45 million people dying in their world. Go over to our case. They concede all the analysis that sanctions trade off with things like cyber operations, because the United States prefers, which means both sides can see the link. But we tell you sanctions are bad because, one, they absolutely destroy economic value and shift countries away from things like sustainable development in the long term and things like actual focuses on democracy, because they hate the West, and that historically they killed 1.5 million people, and the U.S. airstrikes on Iran destroy local oil fields to spike oil prices and push 45 million people into food insecurity. So at that point, we're weighing on strength of link, so you can extend the analysis. Strength of link weighing comes first. Both sides agree with that, which means you literally vote here. But if anything, we're also outweighing on any other magnitude arguments, because they tell you that things like democracy and sustainable development are prerequisites to things like grids in the first place, because you literally look to Iraq, if they never develop and they never have democracy and sustainable growth, then they never lead to things like general economic growth in the long term, which if anything snowballs and outweighs any of their arguments on things like transgenerational scope, because we're talking about long-term economic development, which the analysis Jackson made in summary, they're talking about like maybe a few people dying, maybe is not good enough, when both sides agree that we have 100% probability.
That was a good round.
That was a really good round, guys.
It was definitely like,
Let's stop the recording. Let's get that.
yeah.
Anyone not ready?
On your first work.